Happy Friday, everyone. Josh's Severe Weather. I hope you all have a blessed week. We've got a big storm moving into the eastern U.S. today. Right behind it, a second storm, which looks like it's going to be pretty powerful by the end of the weekend, taking a big turn down through Texas, right up the East Coast here and into the Great Lakes, kind of backfilling here and bringing colder air down with it. So after that storm, the weather pattern does quiet down some for next week, at least the first part of the week. But the next 3 days are going to be pretty unsettled, so we've got a lot to talk about here right on through the end of the weekend and early next week. Let's get to the weather here, and thank you so much for joining me this morning. So I'm not even going to spend too much time talking about the storm track of the one that we're dealing with in the east, but I will show you the short term. More concern growing in Texas for another big outbreak of some severe weather, including large hail, maybe a few tornadoes as we get later into this afternoon, into this evening, an enhanced risk in effect here for severe weather. And the Dallas-Fort Worth area is kind of close to the edge of it, but especially south of Dallas, in southwest of Dallas, all the way back to San Antonio. Be prepared for some more nasty storms here late today into tonight. As that storm tracks through the Gulf Coast states, it's going to take more of a southern approach, so we will see less likely a big complex of storms over land, but there could still be some severe weather on the central Gulf Coast. As that storm tracks northeastward across Florida into the southeast here, though, later tomorrow night into the weekend, we see a growing chance for severe weather as well across Florida up the East Coast. And very heavy rain as well in two rounds here, one coming today, another coming here on Sunday later in the day to the northeast, which again, we're beating to the same drum here of having some stormy wet weather over the weekend. However, this time in the northeast, and I'm talking mainly about Philly, Baltimore, New York, but obviously surrounding areas as well, the threat for severe weather is not as high with this storm system. It's cooler, it's not as unsettled. And we just look at a soggy setup here. Colder weather follows across the Great Lakes. We'll even have some snowflakes in the forecast as we get into the start of May. And yes, this is I'll be honest with you guys. I did expect this to be a much above average tornado year. With this storm pattern, that is not necessarily the case in the areas that typically have the big outbreaks. However, as we saw yesterday in Florida, there is still a chance for tornadoes where the cold and the warm air meet. And right now that is near the Gulf Coast region. However, that will likely change. Here's the water vapor image. You can see storm one now pulling through the Ohio Valley. We do have a complex of storms moving into Florida today and heavy rains moving up the East Coast into the mid-Atlantic region on the cool side of this storm system. As this upper low gets going and tracks eastward, we will have some instability late today into this evening that could affect the central Appalachians and heading into the Piedmont before that loses its punch. The next storm behind it doesn't look as menacing right now. However, as it continues to drop quickly southeast, because what we have is a massive trough in the east, it is going to pick up more instability, more storm fuel, and fast winds aloft and create a volatile setup again here later today across portions of Texas. And that continues into the weekend farther east over the eastern Gulf states and up into the southeast as well. And you can see how quickly this storm is getting kicked by the next system here. But what's going on is we've got a pretty big ridge over the west, so very warm temperatures over California. We may see some record highs in the next couple of days. Same for the Pacific Northwest away from the coast, which of course is going to lead to very rapidly melting snow in the mountains and possible flooding as well. The storm map shows those flood watches in the west. I'm not going to get too far into that because there's really only so much you can predict with that. But in the east right now, quiet. However, we are going to see likely watches and warnings as we get into the evening hours here. We do have a flood watch in effect over the Superior region. That is for rapidly melting snow and heavy rain coming on top of it and yet more snow. Kind of a cycle that seems to be kind of vicious here. And we do have winter weather advisories across the central Rockies with fire weather conditions behind this storm with very fast winds and dry air coming in right behind it. We do have an enhanced risk for fires as well in parts of the Southwest. Here's what happened yesterday. This actually lined up pretty well with my forecast with the tornadoes across the Florida Panhandle and southern Georgia. Possibly a strong tornado in the Hosford area, that is west of Tallahassee. Fortunately, Tallahassee did not see quite as much damage as areas to the west, or it could have been worse. But we obviously had a rough day in Florida yesterday. We also saw a little bit of severe weather with the upper low tracking into the high plains. which I was not quite on to be honest with you guys. I did see how that could happen, but didn't spend a lot of time on that. We also had some overnight hail over Arkansas, Mississippi, and even just north of Birmingham in the Cullman, Alabama area. That was something that was predicted. Yeah, here was yesterday's forecast graphic. Here's the area that lined up well with the tornadoes. So while the Weather Service did have a slight risk, they didn't really have what I thought should have been an enhanced risk in here. And you saw the wind damage here as well. I probably should have beefed things up a little bit in here. I did at least have something in. And now this is the storm we're talking about today, as I've kind of moved that area a little bit farther along to the south and east. Here, sorry guys, here is the Storm Prediction Center forecast for today. Let's zoom back real quick and show you an overview. Obviously, we've got one storm in the east and then the next storm over Texas. That is going to cause severe weather in the southeast tomorrow, and then possibly some severe weather in Florida and up the East Coast during the day on Sunday. After that, though, things do quiet down overall. I think there will be some severe weather towards the second half of next week, but right now, not as much certainty with that. Now, getting back to today, we do have an enhanced risk for severe weather all the way up to Gainesville and the Red River, and then extending down to San Antonio. And there is a tornado risk with any supercells that form. I think it's going to be greater south of I-20, especially when you get to about Glen Rose and Weatherford on eastward to about Waco. Once again, this should look familiar. And then even getting close to Tyler, Texas. But a risk for tornadoes all the way down to the Mexico border here late today into this evening. Big hail is going to be maybe the bigger threat here with these supercell storms that form this afternoon. Any storm that stays discrete could produce a tornado, but overall we could see some pretty big hail along our warm front and on southward through the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area late in the afternoon today. So the evening rush in the Metroplex, millions of you may be on the road, but we may also be dealing with a lot of you under the gun for very large hail. Please be prepared and take this seriously. I know it's Texas and you get a lot of severe weather, but this could be particularly bad for some folks. Also a wind threat across this entire region as well, the enhanced risk area all the way down to San Antonio and just off to the south. And still a slight risk getting all the way to Houston, Corpus Christi, Victoria, Laredo, and maybe even all the way down into the Rio Grande Valley overnight tonight. Tomorrow, the risk for severe weather comes to an end. We'll have morning thunderstorms winding down early in the day over East Texas, and then a quiet weekend expected. And then our focus shifts farther to the east. Now, we do have a threat for some severe storms later today across Florida. I don't think it's going to look as bad as what we saw yesterday, more of a marginal risk. There is a chance maybe we see some enhanced activity on the sea breeze on the East Coast. It may warrant a slight risk upgrade, possibly for the I-95 corridor. But nonetheless, the threat for tornadoes today is going to be low, and we're primarily looking at some hail as our main threat, but also locally damaging wind. As we get to tomorrow, though, chances start climbing. Our low pressure moves through the northern Gulf states and then moves inland in the afternoon and evening. As the warm sector follows it, we do have the same areas that were under the gun yesterday that may deal with some more severe weather tomorrow. That does include a growing chance for some tornadoes around the Big Bend in the eastern panhandle. That includes Tallahassee, Panama City, Apalachicola, and even sneaking up into far southern Georgia, getting close to Valdosta, and surrounding that a slight chance, about 2% risk for tornadoes into the rest of South Georgia and over towards north central parts of Florida. There's a threat for hail as well, especially on the east coast of Florida, but as well as these storms move through the panhandle as well. I say as well too many times, I apologize. And then a wind threat, which is growing here over the Big Bend region in the eastern Gulf states as well. And as we get to day 3, we do see that the risk for severe weather winds down over the panhandle and moves more to the southern and central peninsula, including the I-4 corridor. And we do have somewhat of a growing chance of severe weather. I would not be shocked to see a slight risk here for the low country region up into the outer banks of North Carolina, but some uncertainty coming with that as well. And let's look at the mid-Atlantic states, because we do have more of a marginal risk, but I think we'll have some hailstorms here late today into this evening, especially in West Virginia, maybe even to the north and west of Parkersburg towards Athens, and then even towards the late afternoon and early evening, sneaking into the Piedmont, east of Roanoke, maybe towards Appomattox, down to maybe Mebane, North Carolina, and even all the way down to about Florence and Sumter. And that will spread eastward this evening and probably weaken over eastern North Carolina. But something we have to watch out for. Here's that hail risk, and it's a 5% chance. We do have a wind risk as well in here. I think with the colder air aloft, we're probably looking at hail more places than maybe what the map might show, with that 5% chance. But I don't think it's going to be massive hail like we saw in Texas. And fortunately, we don't really see a tornado risk, but something still to keep an eye on. At this point, it's less than 2%. Tomorrow, we see a quieter day across the majority of this region. It'll be wet across parts of the Northeast early on, but a break in the Carolinas until we get into the evening hours. And notice there is a risk for some thunder. It's a general risk all the way up to about Chicagoland and into southern Michigan and western Ohio, mainly in the evening. And that includes the Tennessee Valley as well. But we're not looking at anything organized on Saturday. Now, as we get to Sunday, the upper low tracks northeast, takes a surface low with it. Right now, just a general risk for thunder into the evening hours over eastern Michigan and sneaking up to the I-90 corridor of Massachusetts and New York. However, farther south, we definitely have more instability in play. And I think this marginal risk needs to come up into central and northern Virginia, maybe getting up to places like Fairfax, Ashburn, and Manassas, possibly even into D.C., towards the later afternoon hours, but models are not in great agreement yet. I think that chance is there, but I don't think we're talking a repeat of what we saw last Saturday over the 95 corridor. We had a lot of strong wind at that point. I don't think that's going to be the same setup here. And the reason why, temperatures at the end of last week were in the 70s and 80s. Now we're talking 50s and 60s. So the storm juice isn't as high, although the dynamics are pretty impressive. Here's a European. You can see our first storm lifts up into the Great Lakes. The next one strengthens as it rounds the base of this trough over Texas. And then it gets absorbed by a strengthening upper level trough and upper low here on Sunday in the Great Lakes. And this is going to allow our surface low to track up towards Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and then even back into Ontario. And with it, with this cold pool, we've got much colder air wrapped in here, and likely some flakes flying here at the beginning of May in parts of the Great Lakes and in parts of Canada as well. Not a big snowstorm, but something we'll be watching. But definitely anomalously chilly over the eastern U.S. as we start next week, as things actually quiet down across the southeast here for a couple of days. But we'll keep an eye on disturbances that follow this down through the Great Lakes, riding up and over the ridge for potentially some active weather somewhere here, maybe in the Tennessee Valley into the Mid-South. That's something I'll be watching for you as well. Here's the European guidance. It shows Storm 1 bringing heavy rain up into the Mid-Atlantic this morning, and then still some rain through this evening and overnight in New York State, eastern PA, even into central New York. Next storm tracks through Texas here and along the Gulf states. You'll see it kind of follows the first one. It actually strengthens and deepens quickly into the 980s. That's a pretty strong low pressure system. We see organized heavy rain and then stronger storms possibly on the wake of it with the cold front here Sunday afternoon and evening. Here comes the snow as the colder air advances southeastward across the Great Lakes, and flakes may mix in all the way into parts of Michigan, possibly even a few flakes in northeast Indiana on Monday night, maybe even a few flakes east of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, and in the mountains of West Virginia on Monday night, early Tuesday. But next week is going to be chilly. It's going to be unsettled, changeable weather, changeable skies here Tuesday into Wednesday across the Northeast and New England. Looks pretty decent across the Southeast, but we do have a weakness that may move through here with a few showers Tuesday night into Wednesday. And then our next storm over the Great Lakes drops south and east. I think there'll be some severe weather out of this, but it's tough to say where and when at this point. The uncertainty level grows too much here, but it looks like Friday is wet once again in parts of the eastern U.S. The weekend we're hoping is going to be better next week, but it will be cool and unsettled with general troughiness in the east. So I don't want to guarantee everybody's dry. And obviously, we haven't had a dry weekend from Friday to Sunday anywhere in the east, really, this winter and spring. So here's a look at the Canadian model, and you can see big storm a little farther east, and then the Great Lakes storm takes over here, but it's unsettled right into Tuesday and early Wednesday. Then a break. Then our next storm brings some wet weather Saturday into the Mid-Atlantic region and parts of the Northeast. So the Canadian is not the model I want to see for better weather in the east next weekend. Excuse me, the GFS model does not agree with the Canadian, though. It does have everything pushing farther south on Thursday and Friday. And then here's our storm system, and it kind of kills it a bit. Still has some rain on Sunday over parts of the Carolinas and the Ohio Valley, but it also a little bit of light rain over the Northeast on Sunday. But overall, it's not nearly as bad as the Canadian. All right, let's zip through the short term. Here's the Southern Plains. Our storms will fire up here this afternoon over north central Texas, Big Sky country, and then move eastward down through Austin, San Antonio, and eventually die off a little bit by the time they get to Houston overnight. We'll see Texas drying out tomorrow morning. Most of the weather moves through the deep south and severe weather across parts of Florida after that. We have a lot of storm fuel here. This is the Cape. We see that climbing all the way up to very close to Fort Worth and Dallas. It's higher off to the south of that area around Stephenville, Glen Rose, Brownwood, over to about Austin, and right across the middle parts of south central Texas, right over the heart of Texas. A lot of storm fuel, so big time hail possible, maybe a few tornadoes as well. And then that will move off the coast here by tomorrow morning. The risk for tornadoes is going to be, I think, kind of brief for a few hours, but you can see it building. I don't think the Metroplex has the greatest chance of seeing it, but south and west around Cleburne and down 35, we definitely could see a few tornadoes in here, maybe even a stronger tornado, mainly during the 5, 6, 7 o'clock hours, and then chances should diminish after that. Here's a look at where the rotating storms may be, where our strongest storms may be. And you can see this is Dallas right here in Fort Worth, primarily just to the south and west of the Metroplex, but right on down 35 and even into not quite deep South Texas, but well south of San Antonio, we do have the risk for stronger storms. Keep an eye on things along the Red River, though. We could see a stronger storm or two in here with the warm front, depending on how far north that gets. Here's a zoomed in view of the HRRR. Here's the storms blowing up at 2 and 3 o'clock here west of Weatherford, maybe around Cisco, and then on southward towards Glen Rose, moving towards the Waco area around 5, 6 o'clock. Killeen, Fort Hood, that entire region, I am concerned about for the risk for maybe a couple of tornadoes and some massive hail again. We saw 4-inch hail the other day. That threat is again there today on the I-35 corridor and continuing all the way down to Austin and College Station, although weakening some around 6, 7 o'clock. Dallas-Fort Worth, you may see severe weather. It's a really tough call at this point, but definitely the threat for hail and damaging wind, maybe an isolated tornado as well. The worst, I think, will be south and east of you. We see these storms continuing overnight into northeast Texas, but weakening some, and then the rain should be out of the picture here by tomorrow morning. For South Texas, haven't talked a lot about Houston, but keep an eye on the storm off to your north and west. This is 9 o'clock. And then moving into the Houston area, and especially around Katy and on the west side here around 10, 11 o'clock. And then Corpus Christi and Victoria late this evening, and Laredo. And then overnight, things should weaken when they get down into the Rio Grande Valley and deep South Texas. But I would still be on the alert just in case this model ends up wrong and these storms hold together a little bit longer overnight. Things are out of here, though, by the weekend. In the southeast, nasty weather here, moving through the Carolinas this morning, more rain and storms. Moving through northern Florida, we could see some severe weather this afternoon. Relatively quiet weather between storms, but then the next one moves in here. We have wet weather to start the weekend off in Louisiana and up the Mississippi Valley. And then storms blowing up over the Northeast Gulf will affect parts of Florida and northern Florida here tomorrow afternoon, east coast of Florida as well. Followed by maybe a few more rain bands and a few thunderstorms tomorrow evening over Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. So kind of a two-part system here. Zooming into Florida, we see the threat for some storms this afternoon grows on the East Coast and maybe some big hail again around Daytona and down to Cape Canaveral, maybe a waterspout or a brief tornado like we saw in the last couple of days. Southeast Florida as well, something to keep an eye on. I'm not sure how this squall line over the Gulf is going to play out, but Tampa Bay area certainly could get hit early this evening, and then we see a break. And then as we head to tomorrow, more storms moving in off the Gulf. This area looks more concerning. We have that slight risk around the Big Bend and Eastern Panhandle, but watch the East Coast as well for discrete storms popping up on the East Coast sea breeze and then getting kicked back out to the beaches around 4, 5, 6 o'clock. That could be pretty nasty. You could see a lot of rain. And then we're watching this main line of storms crossing the peninsula here early tomorrow night, and then even moving into southeast Florida after midnight. And then the next round follows it. That one should be weaker, though. Here's the NAM model showing that next wave coming through here late tomorrow night and into Sunday. And it may generate some severe weather in the morning Sunday over central Florida, and then in the afternoon across South Florida. This is lunchtime and 1 o'clock. Keep an eye on these storms as they have some storm fuel with them. And the model does not go out past 1, 2 o'clock, but certainly we could see it in southeast Florida Sunday afternoon before things quiet down. Now, looking at the Carolinas and Georgia, we see rain moving out of the picture for now. More storms popping up here as we get to tonight over southeastern Florida, or Georgia, I'm sorry, and then a break. A nice day on Saturday, but then storms move up into southern and central Georgia Saturday afternoon, then Saturday night. Going to be wet around Columbia, Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Georgetown, and then a break. And then maybe our more intense storms come early in the day on Sunday around Columbia, Rock Hill on eastward into Lancaster and Cheraw in those areas. And then heading towards Myrtle Beach. Looks to be a nasty beach day, especially in the morning on Sunday. Farther north and east, wet morning here in the Carolinas and Virginia. That rain moves out later this morning. We'll see more storms advancing through the eastern Ohio Valley. There could be some hail and strong winds from about Pikeville and Ashland on eastward towards Charleston and Parkersburg, and then advancing towards the Roanoke Valley, Lynchburg, getting towards Danville and Greensboro here early this evening, and then fading on the doorstep, it looks like, in Raleigh-Durham here late this evening. Same for Richmond. I don't think we'll see a lot of severe weather, but one storm could survive all the way to the 85 corridor. Tomorrow, much better weather. The sun will be out. We should see a pretty decent afternoon in the Carolinas into Virginia before the next batch of rain starts moving in tomorrow night. And we'll see a soggy morning here on Sunday for those of you heading to church, especially across central North Carolina and central parts of Virginia. That moves out, and we've got to keep an eye on additional storms popping up behind it. After some sun pops out, it could be unsettled enough for some localized severe weather across the Piedmont region, and certainly nasty at the coast as well. A zoomed out view of the NAM here. We see Storm 1 moving through the northeast here today into this evening. We'll see a wet morning tomorrow across New York City, and then it clears out in the evening, but just in time for our next storm system to move up the east coast. And there is some storm fuel here, some CAPE in the afternoon on Sunday over northern Virginia, Maryland, and Delmarva. So keep an eye on things after this main wave of rain moves through for additional storms to maybe produce some severe weather on the I-95 corridor and even eastward here into the early evening hours of Sunday before falling apart across New Jersey and southern New England. So I'll talk more about that as we get to tomorrow as things dry out in Texas. I'll be pretty much focused just on the East Coast tomorrow's video, and then a break coming on Sunday before we have another video coming on Monday. Thank you all so much for your time. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to this video or to this channel, as I'll have additional videos on a pretty much daily basis. I really appreciate your time today, and I really want to give all the glory to God, who has given me the strength to do this, to talk you through a long video, to do my best to predict what I can, and of course to get the word out about the potential for severe weather. I really do lean on God every day. It is challenging. I've got a lot on my plate right now with family, with work, with other things going on, but I put all my strength in God, because in Hebrews 13:6, so that with good courage we say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? And it's very easy to just get overwhelmed with things every day. So if you are a believer, I really hope and encourage you to continue to lean on God for everything. If you're not a believer, no judgment at all. I'm not I'm not here to try to convert you. I'm just here to tell you how important God is to me and what he's done in my life and what he continues to do in my life in serving, helping me to serve the community. And I just want you to see that. That's all I really want to talk about today. So if you have any prayer requests, I am happy to pray for you. Thank you so much for your time today. Feel free to list those prayer requests. I will pray for you and have others pray for you as well. Hope you have a great Friday. Stay dry out there. Talk again in the morning. Take care.